In today's video, I want to show you a little sneak peek into how I build color palettes for my custom website clients and how I actually apply it in Squarespace. So how I get good homework from my clients that helps me figure out what color palette would best fit them individually and their business vibe. Before I dive into that though, if we haven't met before, my name is Caitlin and I run Launch the Damn Thing. I am a Squarespace educator, longtime graphic designer, and I've got a few tips to share regarding the color palette situation because I know this is a little bit hard to tackle and I want to help you do this a little bit easier. So let's take a look at some of the tools and resources I use to get this done. Some are free, some are paid. You can decide which versions of what you use and see how that helps the process become a little bit easier and more maneuverable and also shareable with our clients. Let's take a look. When I work with my clients, I have a deep dive into their personality built into their homework. So I want to know the difference between their individual personality as a business owner and also the personality they want their business to have. So I ask them a series of questions. There's about 30 of them. I got the questionnaire from my time in Booked Out Designer from Elizabeth McCravey, so I can't share the worksheet that I use, but I do have another source for you and we'll take a look at that. I also tried to put them in the mind of physical spaces rather than giving me examples of websites, because once you see something, it's kind of hard to unsee it and I don't want to unintentionally copy something that I've already seen. So that's built into the first part of the website project, and by the time that I'm picking the color palette, I already have all of their answers, so I know what to look for, what key phrases to try, and those kinds of things. So with that in mind, my process typically starts on Pinterest. So I take the personality workbook that they've filled out for me, the questionnaire. The client has created a pin board for me. It doesn't have to be a shared board. It can be public, secret. I don't care, as long as I can get the link and see it when I have the kickoff call with them. So we're looking at this Pinterest board together, and I tell them the more you pin, the easier it is for me to find patterns. So typically, on average, I'd say my clients pin between 20 and 50 different things, usually closer to the 20 or 30 mark. And after that point, I can start to see like, okay, there's a lot of this particular style. There's a lot of gold. There's a lot of pinks. There's a lot of greens. There's a lot of whatever. And some script fonts, like based on the questions that I asked them, which again came from the lesson on this in Booked Out Designer, so I can't share that with you. But once I go through that, I have a general idea of what to look for. So together, I will go through their Pinterest board and pick out images that I can bring into Coolors and test. So I can generate a palette from the images they found on Pinterest and told me were representative of their style. So I'm going to walk through that process with you right now and show you what that actually looks like. For a long time, I used to still do color palettes on Coolors. I've had my account with them for a really long time, and now that they're paid, I was so used to it that I just kept subscribing to it. So I do have a paid plan with Coolors now, and you can see in my dashboard, I have a lot of palettes because I've literally been using it for years. So that's what my Coolors looks like. I could load even more down here and probably another load more after that. Yep, we're still going. That's how many color palettes I've generated since I opened this account. I use Coolors a lot. I really like all of the tools, especially for some recent developments that they've added. So if you open up a palette, there are a few things. Let's do open in the generator. There's a few things that they've added up here, including a color contrast checker, which shows you the 4.5 ratio that you're looking for the best contrast. And if you hover over any of these, it tells you the text color and the background color in that combination. So you can see which options in your palette work the best for accessibility purposes. And you can export this by itself or as part of the whole palette later. There's also this fun visualize colors option. So now you're able to open that color palette and look at it in a number of different designs. So if you want to know what it looks like as a website, you can look at it that way. If you want to look at it like business card style, you can look at it that way in art designs, icons, in a web-based application, all kinds of different stuff. Icons, mobile app. So that's really useful, but beyond that, you can still adjust your colors down here. You can add another color to the palette. You can swap things up. So maybe you like the palette, but not the combination that it had before. So like which colors were most prominent. You can divvy that up or shuffle it down here. You can adjust your colors. It's so incredibly useful. You can also look at your color palette in color blindness mode so you can see what the colors do for people that are colorblind or have other visual impairments. So all of these tools make it a really good option. This is a Pinterest board from a real client, and you can see they pinned 32 different pins, so that's a pretty good starting point, right? I see enough in here to notice trends. There's a lot of floral, there's lots of pops of gold, and there's a pretty strong emphasis on warm tones, pinks in particular. Lots of neutrals, skin tones is prominent. So I'm picking up that just from visually at a glance looking at this Pinterest board. But if we dive even further, we could click on any of these pins, take a screenshot of the pin, and open it in Coolors in their image color palette builder to grab literally colors from each image and create our own palette. So this has been my process, so I'll show you how I do that. So if we start with this color palette, we can click on any of these images and take a screenshot. On a Mac, that's Command-Shift-4 to click and drag over the area that you want to take a screenshot. So now I have that. It's going to be on my desktop in a minute, so we can just close out of that. Not a particular science to this, just get the most of the picture in the way. You can even get some of the white background if you want a true white. So I have a few options. Now I'll go over to Coolors, and from here I will start building a palette using their image picker. So if you click that from the toolbar, you'll be able to browse images. I'm going to grab one of those from my desktop. So let's start with this one. That's a pretty dreary color palette that it's pulling, but it shows you in Coolors where that color is coming from. So you can click on any of them and move them around. If you click on the one that is largest, that's the color that's currently selected, but I could change that to pink and so on. But instead, I'm going to just slide through and see what the various options are and see if there's anything that immediately stands out to me. So this one's not bad, but it's not using any of the green or any of the gold, but there are a lot of good contrast colors. We'd probably want to pick one of these two second lightest colors and then change up one of them because they're too similar to each other. I really want a range of pink, gold, green. That one's decent. We could try starting with that. So let's make this the accent color. So if we're thinking about Squarespace, we have 5 or so colors total in the palette. So we'd have our lightest color, our accent color for buttons and links. Then we need a dark color, and I don't want to use that one. I think I'm going to keep that kind of lightest pink color for the second lightest color. Now we need 2 darker colors. So for this one, it's pulling this kind of background color. So let's drag it over here to the green and move it over to the darkest. And for this one, let's find ourselves a gold color. So you can see that that changed up the view of the palette, the vibe that it has completely from what I started with. And all I did was adjust a couple of the colors and reorder them. So let's open that in the generator so that we can save that for later. And go back to the palette and keep scrolling. That one's pretty good. You would order it like that. And then this one, I'd probably want to use maybe this color. And I like that color. I might want it to be just a tad brighter. And this one, I might prefer to use something that's more in the pink family. There we go. It's not bad. Let's open that one in the generator too. If we were looking for more of a botanical vibe and less of the pink, this might be a good option to play with. I wouldn't use it like that exactly, but I would adjust the colors there. And this is pretty close to something we've already done. Okay, so we've kind of exhausted the built for you colors that it's already picked. But if we come down here, we have this one, which is a little bit more 70s vibe. And then we have this one, which is almost the same thing. So we have two that are very similar to each other. They have slightly different vibes. So what I'm looking for when I'm choosing a color palette is based on the client and their particular personality and the personality of the business. This is based pretty loosely on the answers that they've given me in their brand personality workbooks. And then there's also a list of 500 adjectives or keywords that are kind of character traits that you can ask people to identify with. So this will help give you a literal vibe to look for in the color palette. What I do is I come back to the color palettes that we've created and I say like, okay, does this feel like that to me? Would this work in a real website? And now I'm using Coolors to see like, okay, let's visualize that palette in a real world situation. Does that feel good? Like in a situation like that. Not that we're building out apps or anything, but it's always good to see the colors being used in real life scenario type situations. Let's shuffle those colors a bit and see what that could look like. So it looks like that has more emphasis on the green. Let's see if we can shuffle to one where there's more emphasis on the pink or the gold. But the red looks nice. See, I might not have picked that to start with until I saw it. Sometimes you really don't know what you like until you see it, and this was one of those situations. So that's one of the options. Let's look at this one. That one feels a little bit different. So it looks almost the same in the actual generator where the colors are lined up next to each other, but when they're put into practice, it feels a lot different. It's a little bit more feminine, I think. So I actually really like that. Let's backtrack just one and look at the color contrast checker. So it looks like most of the color combinations that I would, in theory, use for a design using this palette would work just fine. And let's check the color blindness. So interestingly, a couple of them would have a totally different vibe. A monochromatic green palette feels a lot different than a monochromatic or nearly monochromatic pink palette with gold. So that's interesting to know. So if this is one that I wanted to keep, then I would go to save and I would name the palette something with the keyword and then maybe a dash in the company name or the client initials, something like that. So let's just do that. And then I would give it a project. I'm not going to do that for this one though. So now I've added to the myriad of color palettes in my Coolors account. So let's focus on this one. I think I like that one slightly better for this particular demo. And now I'm going to switch gears. So a new tool that I've become aware of is the Color Palette Builder from Color Palette Studio. This is kind of an easier way to introduce yourself to color palette building if you're not familiar with the process and don't really know how to combine colors in a way that will give you a good color palette to use. Because one thing that I've learned over the years is that the color palette by itself in this view can look phenomenal together, but actually applying it to a real design and using it in text and buttons and graphics and icons, it can feel and be totally useless. So to have something like this set up where it can help you pick colors in the right formulas is a really great place to start if you're uncomfortable with this part of the process. So for this one, this is a similar color palette-ish. This is one of my favorites of the options. We could also do Modern Romantic, seemed a bit too vibrant for me, but we could try that. This is in my use of the tool, so I'm logged in my account, but you can cycle through all of these. There's like 20 or so different color palette combinations or color styles. And if we start with one, this is a little bit too vibrant for me, but this is kind of the same concept. So it's telling you all of the light colors, all of the bright accent colors, and all of the dark colors. So it's broken it up into different segments for you. And then from that, you can pick and you can add as many colors as you want. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into that color palette that I like, this one. I'm going to copy those color codes and put them into the color palette builder. To copy and paste that, I was using paste.io, which is an app on Mac. It may come on other platforms too, but that's my favorite. Clipboard history. You can actually organize all of the clipboard stuff into different pins. Really, really useful. So anyway, so I've got all the colors in there, and now had nothing whatsoever to do with this palette, by the way. It could be. So the idea was for you to like click on one and add it to the list, but I've already got my palette, so I'm just going to use that. Now I'm going to use the generator, the AI generator, to give them names, just because that seems like fun. So I'm going to give it a theme. Okay, let's see how that does. Yeah, that worked great. So we've got pearl, blush, bronze, garnet, umber. Fantastic. Didn't have to come up with those myself. If I turn this off, for example, you can see the entire palette, but only the ones with the check marks are going to be accessible. Now we are going to click on Show Compliant Pairings, and what it's going to do is generate the compliant pairings that work in the ratio that is accessible and tell me the score for all of those. So you can see the highest score is the highest contrast and the lower scores are the lowest contrast, but they all work. And now we can show the palette. So that's the color palette, the hex codes, the color names, and then this one also shows the background color and the text color and the contrast ratio. So that's really nice to be able to share with clients so that they know that we did our due diligence on that, and the approved color combinations for them to use. So now you can generate a URL, and even though I already have one in Coolors, this one actually is easier to pass off to the client because I have a Coolors account. I pay for that Coolors account. The client doesn't necessarily do that. In fact, most of the time that's not the case. So anytime the client pastes in that link that we generated with our builder from our account, if you have this tool from Color Palette Studio, you can see that it's generating the information for them, even though we did it in our account, maybe on a different computer. I actually did it in a different browser. So this is what they would see potentially. So you'd also be able to come down here and say show palette to make sure that those are showing on this actual page. And then after that, if you click export, then that would open in a new tab and it would show all of the color palettes, the hex codes, the color names, and then down here would also show the text and background color pairings and the contrast ratio. So you can show that you did your research and you know what's accessible based on current best practices. From here, if you click print, which is on Mac Command P, you can actually print it out. You just need to make sure that this background graphics option is checked, because if not, the colors won't actually be in there, just the information. So that's something that you can export and save as a PDF. You can see the destination here is not my printer, it's an actual PDF file, which it would generate, and then you can email to your client. So that's an option, but also if you instruct your client to download the free Color Buddy Chrome extension, if you know they're a Chrome user, they'll actually also be able to create a new palette. And now we have that same color palette and copyable hex codes, RGB codes, and CMYK codes right from here. And if we scroll down, we can also see the pairing. So we know which background color and foreground color that works together. So this is a totally free way for your client to have access to this in their browser and have quick access when they're in Canva or when they're in other tools where they want those colors to copy and paste in and don't want to remember them. That's a really excellent way to do that. So you can get this color palette builder from the colorpalettestudio.com. If you go to their font pairing guide, that's the font guide that they built in Notion. It has a ton of, just a ton of details, including which fonts are available in Canva, which fonts are free, which fonts are paid, where to go for font, and it also has some of those branding vibe personality, adjective type things, and also some color palette guides and stuff like that. So I have all of the tools. I bought the color palette builder, the tester, the font pairing guide, and there's also some freebies, and then you can access your tools from your account. So to apply those colors, now if we come back into our template, whatever we're starting with in Squarespace, if you go directly into your site styles to the colors, this is where you apply the color palette you just generated to see if it will work for you. But what I suggest is to not do it on a blank page like that. Go down to, if you've bought my starter kit template, you'll have access to this pre-built template style guide. Go directly to that page, then over here in the top right corner, click on the paintbrush icon to hop into site styles while you are looking at this page so that you can see what happens to the colors you're putting in the content, like the demo content. So let's do the lightest color. And I still have that in my paste clipboard, so I'm going to do this color. And that one. Okay, so if that's our color palette, then you can see how that actually works in here, and then you can make adjustments from there if you need to. But we know that the contrast is going to be good from the get-go because we already checked the color ratio before we even put the colors in here. Now first, before I get any further, I do have a separate video on diving into the color themes and setting that strategically so you don't have to manually edit all of the themes that it generates for you. But let me just go over that really quickly. There is a reason why the colors are in this order. If you start with any new Squarespace template on 7.1, you'll notice that they tend to be in a certain order. And if you're in the code, you know the names of the color placeholders. So this one is always called lightest. Notice that that corresponds with the background color theme, right? Lightest one. This one is always called light, and that corresponds with the second lightest color set. This one is called bright, and it corresponds with these two right here. So the middle color is the accent color, basically. Buttons, links, those kinds of things. And then the second darkest color is this one over here, and that corresponds with dark 1 and dark 2. And this bottom one is the darkest color, and that corresponds with darkest 1 and darkest 2. So lightest, light, bright, dark, darkest. If you put your palette in this box in that order, it does not have to be white, literally. It can be any color. So for example, you could make this like a yellow if you wanted. It literally does not have to be white. And the same goes for the darkest color. It literally does not have to be black, but it's acting as your black, and this one is acting as your white. Everything in between that should be light to dark diagonally in that order. Okay, so I hope that helps. If you put the colors in the palette in your Squarespace account in that order, then you'll have much better generated color themes and you'll have much more minimal edits to come in here because, as you well know, if you click on the pencil icon for any of these, there's like 100 different things you can adjust the color for. And you definitely do not want to have to do that for every single option in all 10 of these, right? So if you put the colors in the right order, you'll have much less to adjust in here. Okay, so that's applying the color palette. Now, after you make your adjustments and you're happy, then you can get started building the rest of the website, knowing that your colors are already set and ready to go. So let's do a recap really quick because that was a lot. First, we send the client some sort of questionnaire where we pick their brain about their personality themselves as an individual and also the personality of their business and what they want their business vibe to be. So once you have those answers and you get them to create a Pinterest board where they can pin a lot of the graphics that will help you see like some visual representation of that. Then from that Pinterest board, you can take screenshots of those images, pull it into something like Coolors, Illustrator, Photoshop. They can all do something very similar. Coolors just helps you by automatically selecting palettes that get you jump started. Or you can use something like the color palette builder tool to generate palettes based on set styles. And there's like 20 or so to pick from. And then within those 20, there's 3 sets or 3 options of light, light, bright, and dark colors to choose from, so you can build your own palette from that. And there's like a million color options in those. Once you've built it, then apply it in Squarespace. If you do that strategically, it will build the color themes for you. And if you're using my starter kit template, you'll be able to see how they're actually applied in your headings, in your paragraphs, in your buttons, in the forms, in the blocks, and all the things, right? So it's going to help you make those minor adjustments in Squarespace if you need to. And then if you're passing that color palette off to the client, there's various ways for you to export that palette via Coolors. You can export a document that's like a multi-page PDF. If you're using something like the color palette builder, you can actually export the link, send them a link to access that. They can open it up and see all the codes. They can also download the free Chrome extension and be able to pull, copy and paste hex codes, RGB codes, and CMYK codes directly from the Chrome extension for free. So that's a high level overview of how I build color palettes. There's a lot more little details, but this is the pared down version. I hope that's been helpful for you so that you have less questions about how to create them and how to apply them and what looks good on websites and where to get the tools and resources and all the things. It's a lot, I know. I've been in the game for a long time, so it's become a lot easier for me over the years, but hopefully this video walks you through kind of from start to finish, and your next color palette will be a little bit easier for you to come up with. If you want to dive further into the color themes on Squarespace, make sure you watch this video next, where I go into that in more detail than I did today. That's all I have for this video. I will see you in the next one. Bye!